Hello and good evening. Hang on, let me just. I have had some troubles this week. I have had some troubles. As you may have noticed, the intro screen isn't the same as it was. That's because my Streamlabs OBS, well, for lack of a better technical phrase, went tits up. And completely garbled itself. I switched it on Sunday, and it weren't working correctly. So I fiddled about with it and made it worse, as you do. We'll get to the hat bin. Hold your horses, hold your horses. Anyway, lovely to see you. So yes, I'm in the process of fixing it. So I'm going to put it. It's going to be better. We're going to bring it back better, faster, quicker. You know, like the $1 Million Man or 6 million. Is it $6 million man? It is, isn't it? Bigger, faster, better. We can rebuild it. But anyway, at the moment it's slightly knackered. It took me a couple of hours on Sunday to go what, and then get it back to a vaguely working state. So anyway, it is now a vaguely working state, but it's not quite where it should be. But the universe is as it should be. I've managed to get that working, and I had to put the camera back on, and it was just technically extremely dull and boring, but one of those things you have to do. So anyway, it will be better. So anyway, apologies for any glitches that I may incur. Beyond the normal glitches that always occur. Because it's a work in progress. Let's put it that. Have I not learned to back? Well, this is the thing. I do back up religiously, but it seems that the Streamlabs puts its stuff in an odd location. And when I went to said odd location once, I eventually found it on the internet, telling me where I need to do it. It was some obscure place. Which it doesn't look like my backup actually backed up that bit, so I'm going to have to be a bit more cautious. But it's supposed to back up to the cloud, and it gives me all sorts of warnings. Actually this evening, just before I started, it said, "You haven't backed this up to the cloud. Would you like to?" I said, "Yes, I would," but I remember pressing that last time, and it obviously did no use whatsoever. So I don't know how to get it back from the cloud, or whether the cloud is an entirely friendly place for it to be. But anyway, I'm going to have to investigate a bit more because it went wrong in quite a big way, and I've mostly fixed it, but there we go, never mind. And I'm I'm a reasonably technical person, but I wouldn't say I was an expert, but there we go. But anyway, we're back, okay. Technical gremlins aside, it's still working. Anyway, lovely to see you all. So lots of lovely, familiar, friendly names on the chat. Always good to see. So how are you? It's Monday, we're back again. And it is the sci-fi. Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of trying to get back to the title of this. I mean, I know we don't necessarily do some actual writing as we did, perhaps a year ago, but we are talking about righty things on the stream. That's kind of what it's all about. So anyway, it's a sense purpose of stream, apart from the waffles and the waffling and various distractions and anything that sidetracks us and comes along. Now the hat pin. Okay, now the hat pin. Now the hat pin is actually, I don't know if you can see this, I'm going to have to zoom in. Now I don't actually, well, I do have a zoom on my camera, but I've got no idea how it works. So the zoom functionality will be replaced by my good self moving closer to the camera. Which is decidedly low tech, but it's very reliable, which is the important bit. Okay, so here we go. We're going to zoom. Okay, here we go. Ready? I've got to move the camera. There we go. It's actually, I don't know if you can see that well, that is the planet Saturn floating in a cup of tea. And the reason, of course, that the planet Saturn is floating in a teacup on my hat is because the planet Saturn, on average, is less dense than water. So if you could have, and I don't like quite as blue tea, it's one of those things. If you could, which of course you can't, but if you could make Saturn, or at least have a cup of tea big enough for Saturn to float in, then Saturn will in fact float in a cup of tea. Its density is less than that of water on average. Obviously you'd need a very large cup of tea, and there'd be a few gravitational problems that you'd have to overcome, not least the laws of physics, but other than that it would in fact float in a cup of tea. So there we go. It could be blue. I don't know, actually no, I suppose it's a tea cup. I must admit I hadn't really thought about the blue. It is blue, isn't it? And that's not just an effect of the the green screen. The Saturn obviously, as you can probably tell, is green, which means it's transparent because of the green screen. So it looks like I've got a bullet hole in my head, but I haven't got a bullet hole in my head, I can reassure you. Maybe tea turns blue. I mean, it depends on what kind of tea you're after. I mean, you're making an assumption about the type of tea I drink. You know, I mean, maybe I drink some exotic tea. I mean, I don't, but is there a blue tea? I mean, my wife drinks all sorts of weird teas. I mean, she has peppermint tea, and she has what does she have today? Some ghastly salted caramel tea. I mean, that's just wrong. But she likes it, and she has chamomile tea and all sorts of teas, which, as far as I'm concerned, aren't tea. Okay, tea is tea. It's British tea, which of course doesn't exist either because it all comes from India, doesn't it, or Ceylon or something. But anyway, I certainly can get different coloured tea. Some of the teas I make for her are all mysterious colours, actually. But as far as I'm concerned, those aren't tea. Okay, they're just coloured water with some odd flavour in it. That's not tea. Tea is a drink which, you know, you put a tea bag in, or if you're being very posh, you put some tea leaves in a teapot and brew it there for it, and then, you know, you pour it into a cup. Now, there of course is a big debate over Scottish blend with Orkney water is the only tea, says Commander Oak. I have got some Scottish blend tea. I haven't tried it with Orkney water. That's probably not the easiest to come by where I live. I'll have to try that at some point. I don't know. I mean, given that water is just H2O, I mean, what's the Orkneyness? Is Orkney another element on the periodic table I haven't come across? A Sam tea can't be beaten. As a true Brit, I worship the tea gods of myself. No, I say I've tried a Sam tea and I don't really like it. I am partial to a bit of Earl Grey, I have to say, but I kind of went off Earl Grey because it's too it's too closely assimilated with a certain starship captain, and it kind of like it's a bit too obvious to drink Earl Grey tea now because everyone goes, oh, you're only drinking that because. So I just tend to stick to what I like, which is actually normal tea. Just, you know, nothing particularly. Yeah, I just like a nice cuppa, as we say in the UK, a nice cuppa. That's what I like. You'll send me a bottle of Orkney water. Excellent, awesome. JL19, given that I don't actually like tea, the only tea that ever came close to getting me to like it was a Sam. Okay, well that's interesting. So yeah, there are all sorts of tea. So no, I don't think there's a tea that has a sort of deep blue colour like that, but there probably is one. You know, out there on the internet, there's probably something like that. I'm a terrible Brit. Well, you don't like tea? What's the matter with you, man? Yeah, we have you know, the stereotype of British people drinking tea, no matter what the circumstances are, is in my experience is actually very, very true. I mean, we drink tea when it's hot. You know, and it does sort of work. It's a bit weird. I mean, and certainly some of my American friends go, "What are you doing?" You know, it's hot outside. It's like 30 degrees centigrade plus. Nice hot cup of tea. That's what we need. I don't know. I want a cold beer or a Coke or something, and they kind of. But it does work. It's odd. You know, a nice hot cup of tea, very refreshing on a hot summer's day. Are you sure? And then of course there's the perennial debate. As to, you know, do you put the milk in first or do you put the milk in afterwards? Now I'm a pragmatic man, as you know, and I have two. This is a very religious topic, actually. So yeah, we'll proceed at our peril on this one because this, you know, I mean, forget your left versus right and your Democrats versus Republicans, and you know your Brexit versus non-Brexit. Milk before tea or milk after tea is serious stuff. Okay, so Nim Duskin says always after. Sophia says I'm not British, so no milk. It's only G-Man says always after. So here we go. The opinions are out now. Okay, so we're getting votes for always after. No milk at all, says Reg W. Now, after end of conversation, says a cover. So most of the votes. Interesting here. Most of the votes are going for after. Now, when I make tea, milk before the bag is ridiculous. Oh no, well there's the rub. You see, it's the bag. If you put the milk in after, it doesn't mix properly. Well, you see, now here's the thing. Hotter the drink, the greater the cooling effect, raises core temperature and hastens the cooling. Well, there we go. Maybe there's a scientific explanation for why British people drink tea in the summer. Okay, so anyway, so the before milk or after milk. Now, when it comes to a mug of tea, okay, now that's typically in the UK, and it may be different everywhere else because we're a bit mad on tea. That's traditionally made with a tea bag, okay? Leave the bag in. Now, a tea bag, just in case you're not familiar with a tea bag is a bag made out of some very, very thin, porous paper, I suppose it's made out of, which allows the tea to sort of sit in a little pocket, and you put it in the water and it percolates out, does the stuff. Okay. Now that's a relatively newfangled way of doing tea. Okay, and it's to basically make it a bit easier, so you haven't got to deal with the tea leaves that otherwise will get stuck at the bottom of your mug, which you know you don't want a mouthful of tea leaves at the end of a really nice cup of tea. That would ruin the whole experience. So that's important that you don't get that. So you know, modern tea making, if you like, tends to require you boil the kettle full of water, you pour that into the mug, then you put the tea bag in, and then you leave it for a little bit. You have to leave it you mustn't agitate it. That's just criminal. Okay, you leave it in there maybe for 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, then you fish the tea bag out and dispose of it, you know, organically and recycling, etc. And then you add the milk in. Now that's kind of the traditional. That's the way I understand to make a cuppa. Okay, which is a cup of tea in a mug. However, okay. If you are making tea the old-fashioned way, which of course is to boil the kettle full of water, probably on a stove rather than one of these newfangled electric kettles. Boil the water on the stove. This is going back a few years. Then you pour a bit of hot water into your teapot. Now, a teapot is a device for making tea. Okay, so you pour a bit of hot water, boiling water, into the teapot, and you swirl it around, and the only reason you do that is to warm up the teapot. Then you discard that water, okay, so it gets rid of any dust that's potentially in your teapot, and it's also warmed the teapot up considerably. Then what you do is you put enough loose tea leaves in the teapot, and then fill it up with boiling water. Then you leave that for 3 minutes, and then you have to have teacups at this point as well. Now, teacups are not mugs, okay? Teacups have little saucers, and you put cups on top of said saucers for no obvious reason other than that you have to have 2 pieces of crockery rather than one. So, and you know, you can't hold. A mug has a handle which is designed to be gripped by normal human hands. Now, a teacup does not. A teacup has a handle which can only be gripped by your thumb and your first finger, and when you pick it up, you have to hold it like that, and you have to stick your little pinky finger out at an angle, a jaunty British angle, in order to hold your cup of tea properly. But in my experience, okay, having watched my grandparents make tea in this fashion for many times, they put the milk into the teacups, and then with a strainer to stop the tea leaves getting into the teacups, you pour from the teapot through the strainer into the teacup with the milk already in there, and then hence you make a cup of tea. Now, I have to say that made a jolly fine cup of tea. But I think perhaps the most important thing, the thing I most remember, is the sticking out of the pinky. So, you know, if you're going to hold, there you go, if you're going to hold it like this, you have to stick the pinky out. It's like an antenna. It's like, I know it's receiving some sort of tea emission. I'm not quite sure exactly what, but you can't hold a teacup in any other way because the handle is too small. It's typically like, and then what you must do is you must guide the teacup towards your mouth with one hand holding the saucer and one hand holding the teacup. You must take a little sip like that, but place it back down on the saucer, and then you must then put the saucer back on the table. You're not allowed more than one sip while it's in the air, okay? If you want another sip of tea, you have to repeat that whole lifting the saucer and teacup process to your face and back down again. That's just the way it is, all right? So there we go, that's potted history of how to drink tea British style. Although I've done it, says Kamal Hope Pribis, you will have a blazing row over tea manners and take things for two. That's just how I've been taught. I don't know if that bears any resemblance to what anybody else does. Am I infusing my tea before boiling? No, I don't think I'm doing that, though. I hope the Americans in the chat are taking notes. I want to know more of this. Yeah, I mean that was really funny. That video about microwaving water. I mean, that is wrong, okay? You know, if you're going to put energy into water, you have to do it the old-fashioned way, otherwise you're not going to get it. You can't microwave a cup of tea. That's just not acceptable. The milk or water argument. Next, you will be entering the clotted cream jam or the jam and clotted cream discussion. Oh yeah, I haven't got that far. I do like those little scones. Well, I suppose there's also the scones versus scones argument. I mean, where do you stand on that one? I mean, that's important. These are things that need to be sorted out. Scones or scones? Now I can see arguments in both directions. Is it a scone or is it a scone? Because we don't say "gone with the wind," do we? We say "gone with the wind," so therefore it's a scone. Of course, in my house, it's always, because I've got 2 teenage boys. Well, one's no longer a teenage boy actually, but one is, and they eat a lot of food. Whenever scones appear, they are scone very quickly. So there's scones in our house. It's pronounced, but you know, then you got stone, and then obviously, so it would be scone. Okay, so which is right? How did you spend your Monday, Sean? They're just arguing about tea with a load of sci-fi geeks. Yeah, so how are we doing? We're 16 minutes past, and we've done a fair bit of waffles. Anyway, that was the tea. And you know, for those of you who aren't aware of dear old Douglas Adams, of course, who's sadly no longer with us. You know, he was very particular about his tea as well. He even put it in his novel. You know, the Nutrimatic dispenser, trying to make a perfectly decent cup of tea. It consumed the entire power of the ship's computer for many minutes whilst they were under attack. But he did actually manage to do it, as I recall. But prior to that, the Nutrimatic dispenser was only capable of making something that was almost but not entirely unlike tea, from what I remember. So anyways, there we go. Ah dear, it's good to be back. Milk first, cream first on the scones. Oh, so Alan's being very definitive. Milk first, cream first on the scones. Cream first. I think on scones or scones, or whatever we've decided, I probably would be tempted to go for the cream first as well, but I'm not. I think I'm rather practical on this one. I think I kind of lean both ways, as it were. I would probably cut my scone in two, butter one side with cream and butter one side with jam, and then put it together, hence satisfying both sides. So now, well, I'm going to try and avoid existential questions on the stream, because we do get says milk on the scones and jam in the tea. Well, that's a different way of looking at life, I suppose. Cream is replacing the butter. Yeah, I tend to agree with you there, Alan. I'll go with that. Anyway, JL1998. It's pronounced in quotes, and he's just spelt the word. That doesn't help. Jam sticks to the scone. I suppose, yeah, actually, yeah. Getting the cream to spread can be, and because it tends to roll up on the knife, doesn't it, rather than stick to the scone, and you end up with a bit of a mess. So it's an art form. Yeah, it's very complicated being British. All these things that you've got to know, which of course, you know, if you don't know them, then you'll just be ousted in polite. You can't survive in society without knowing your scones and your tea. You know, you're just instantly ridiculed. Ah dear. Anyway, so enough of that. It's nearly 20 past, as per usual, and you've managed very, very well to distract me. But there we go. Scottish, yeah. Well, I mean, you've got. I mean, the thing is that I'm not going to go too far down this one because I don't know all my facts, but I do know that scones and different bread products have all sorts of different names in the UK depending on where you're from. So I went up to Scotland last year, and I was in the Highlands, and they. I couldn't order any bread products at all because I didn't know what they were called, which was quite funny. And I just sort of pointed it out, and yeah, the dear Scottish lady obviously took pity on me and gave me what I would call a scone, but she called something completely different. I have no idea what it was, but it was truly tasty, so I didn't really mind. But yeah, you know. Bread has infinite varieties in the United Kingdom, and long may that continue. There's lots of cultural diversity there, which is excellent. I heard people put milk in first because it mixes better and doesn't form a skin. I don't think that's a good explanation because A, they have never heard of the stirring, and there's a teaspoon. I've had a problem with skin on my tea. I've only ever had problems with skin on pure milk if you heat it up too fast. That tends to develop a skin. But when you're making things like hot chocolate, but of course that's just very uncouth. Nobody has hot chocolate who, you know, would rather have a cup of tea. That's your wife. Yeah, she was with me, alas. It wasn't anything. Yeah, it was a bread product, let me say. And Hull bread cake is like a large hamburger bun. Yeah, so I'd like a roll. You mean a balm? Yeah, you see, all that. Yeah, it's very, very complicated. Yeah, I mean, you think coffee is bad. Ordering bread in the United Kingdom is very, very difficult. Chris baking. Dear. It's a derogatory term called myths, pointed to those who put their milk in first. Oh, the combat patisserie, yes. That's just brilliant. Dear. Anyway, so vaguely talking about, trying to move the conversation vaguely in a half potentially sensible direction. Tonight we've been talking a lot about science fiction, so it's time to talk about a bit of fantasy for a change. So let's move away from the spaceships and the laser beams and the light swords to fantasy stuff. Now I happen to be rereading, because I do this every so often, and I suddenly got an urge to do it, as it were, over the weekend. I thought, I haven't read Lord of the Rings for a while. Probably about 5 years, possibly more now. So I thought I'm gonna go reread it again, because it's far enough ago that I haven't read it that I thought actually I would probably enjoy reading it. I obviously know what happens in the story, but I'm going to read it again. So I have started reading it again, and since 5 years is a fair old bit of time. And one of the things that jumped out to me straight away was because Tolkien likes the odd words, doesn't he? Yeah, I haven't actually got to the story yet. I'm still reading the preface and the author's notes bit at the beginning of the book and the concerning hobbits. And I haven't actually started yet, and I've been reading it for about a night and a bit. But one of the things that jumped out to me, just kind of getting myself back into the Lord of the Rings sort of mode, because of course it's a book that was written, I think it was finished about 1954. I think that's about when it was first published, and it was sort of written from the end of the Second World War, so sort of the 15 years, well, probably a little bit earlier than that. So I think he went through the Second World War. He was writing some of it, and then I think he finished it, or at least published it, in 1954. So it's pretty old now. I mean, what's that? It's nearly 70 years, isn't it? Stop on, there we go. Chris Viking says it's published in 54. And yeah, I think I read that. I don't think that was me being clever. I think I read that last night, and I've just vaguely recalled it. So it's quite old, and you can sort of tell that in the way that Tolkien describes things. But it is the thing that jumps out to me straight away is when he's talking about what he's doing. He said, "Well, I wrote The Hobbit." And then people seem to like it. I was most surprised. It's like very sort of disarming. But I was doing the serious stuff. I was working on all the background to the novel. I was working out all the Elvish languages and the history of the Elders and the Second Age and the First Age and this little thing that I wrote, The Hobbit, was set in the Third Age, and people seem to like that. I don't know why. I didn't expect them to. Kind of. And I was back to the serious work of doing all the background. For which I never expected to publish it whatsoever, and don't intend to, is basically what he's writing in the preface to the version I've got. And so hence, but people wanted to know more about these hobbits, so I've written this Lord of the Rings thing, to sort of appease them, and then I can get back to my serious work of cataloguing all my imaginary world. And you get the overwhelming impression, from the way he's writing, the actual process of writing the book, i.e. the story that we've all enjoyed, i.e. The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, is kind of a byproduct of something far, far, far more serious. And it's like, well, yes, the writing of the books, that's just sort of doggerel for the average punter. The serious stuff is all my Elvish language and the background histories and all this sort of stuff, which he almost seems to take far more seriously than the writing of the actual novels for which we remember him. And I don't know we've talked before on this stream about how much time do you spend world building as to how much time you actually spend writing, and Tolkien is definitely one of those who went a long way down the route of I'm just sticking with the world building. And the novels almost seem to be an accidental kind of, oh well, yes, I've just I put some novels together because it seemed like a sensible thing to do to help me work out the important stuff. And of course, it's the novels that we read and the novels that we enjoy. Has anyone managed the Silmarillion? I have managed the Silmarillion in the dim and distant past. It was without wanting to make any offence to the anybody who any of the religious types, but it felt to me like reading the Bible. It was similarly constructed and at times equally impenetrable and dull. So I mean some bits of the Silmarillion, I quite like the creation myth bit at the beginning, which is in my head quite similar to the way the Bible does it, i.e. there's a certain number of days and there's a certain there's a chief. I mean in Tolkien's realm there's like a chief god, isn't there, Ulivator or something like that, and then sort of a lower level of beings and another lower level of beings, and then there's humans, dwarfs, elves, and everything else. And then obviously in the Bible there's God and there's angels, and then there's I think various different levels of angels, and then there's sort of humanity kind of below that. But so that and that felt quite similar in some ways, and then it all goes wrong, and the evil enters the world, which is again very similar, and so all that sort of stuff happened. And then you've got some quite nice stories like the Luthien, Tenuviel, and is it Fëanor? I can't remember. It's been a long time since I read the Silmarillion. Some nice sort of mythy kind of stories, and then you've got the men of the West and the the destruction of Numenor and all that kind of stuff, which is quite interesting to read. But there's an awful lot of really boring stuff in between the good bits, if you ask me personally. It was Fëanor, wasn't it? Oh, it was Beren. Sorry, Beren and Luthien. That's right. Fëanor did the Silmarils himself, and he was the one that got his hand cut off or something. I can't remember. But anyway, there's a lot of rich background there, and the fact that the map was changed because part of the land sunk. And all that sort of stuff, and you can kind of look at the old map, and then you can look at the map that's available in Lord of the Rings, and there's the differences, but you can see where the similarities are. That's all interesting stuff. There's a vast amount of work that's been done there. You can see that over, it must have been over years. It is hard, and it is kind of. I suppose it is kind of the Middle Earth Bible. Gollum was born in Western Superman. There's a road there called Gollum Lane. Really? Wow. So where are the Blue Wizards? Well, the Blue Wizards, of course, they went. Didn't they? They were the ones that went east. They never came into the Tales, did they? Alan RPD, would Tolkien pass examination by a modern editor? No, he'd get absolutely ripped to shreds by a modern editor. Tolkien would not stand a chance. I mean, I'd love to know what the editor made of Lord of the Rings when it first came out, because I mean, I know, bits of Lord of the Rings are very pleasant to read. I'm at, right this minute, I'm right at the beginning where Gandalf and Bilbo are sort of chewing the fat over the ring before it all gets urgent. Okay, so Gandalf has basically said, look, it's far less urgent than in the movies. In the movies where Gandalf says, keep it secret, keep it safe, and then he turns up like about 30 seconds later and goes, have you still got it? And Bilbo goes, yes, it's here. In the book, there's like a 12-year gap between those two scenes. I was reading this thinking, oh, that's amazing. Gandalf goes, keep it secret, keep it safe, I'll be back in a bit. And the book basically just says, and 12 years later. And it's like, really? Is it 12 years? This book is very chilled out. But this bit is interesting because Tolkien's writing style is pretty verbose, when he's telling the story, in this case he's got Gandalf and Bilbo in the Hobbit hole, and they're discussing, well, this is where the ring came from, and there was the power of this, and the elves did that, and it's like being in front of a comfortable fire with a nice Labrador, laid out at your feet with a nice cup of tea. Dare I say it, with the milk put in first. You're sitting there, and somebody is telling you a story about the great rings of yore. That's very, very comfortable. But there are bits in Lord of the Rings, and I know exactly where they are, where you're just thinking, what was he on? Why is this in the story? Why is it so slow, and is this ever going to get any better? I don't think a modern editor would stand a chance. No, probably the other way around, because he'd just be told to sling his hook. Yeah, the lore is interesting. The lore is interesting, but a great author, terrible writer is my perhaps blasphemous. I think he was a good writer at times. I mean, it's difficult by the modern standards to give him a fair critique, because a modern editor would rip out, well, virtually everything. Lord of the Rings would be quite short. It's like, get to the action, get to the action. So, you know, the Hobbits wouldn't take an entire book to get to Rivendell, you know. Tom Bombadil, all that bit would be gone. I don't know what Tolkien was on actually with Tom Bombadil, because it's a piece of the story which kind of doesn't go anywhere, doesn't help move the plot on, doesn't expand on the major characters. It's literally just a scene which has no obvious purpose. That's a peculiar one. Tom Bombadil, I have no idea what that was for. And as a writer, I'm looking at that going, what was he trying to do? Was he just a favoured character that Tolkien had in his head and thought, I'm going to put this character in because I want to? Because you've got this kind of absolutely bad, urgent, you know, mission. So, you know, you start off with learning a little bit about the ring and, you know, how bad the ring is, and it's the agent of the enemy, and the enemy is now looking for you, by the way, so don't take long to get to the, you know, the first part of the quest is basically to get to the pub, isn't it? Which I quite like. It's very British, you know. What are we going to do? Well, yeah, there's a magic ring. There's 9 things that are out there trying to hunt you down and kill you. What I want you to do is head to the pub. And then every British person would go, yep, okay, that's a great plan. So yeah, get to the what was it? It's the Green Dragon, isn't it? At Bree. So yeah, so I read a little bit about Tom Bombadil after the event, and he's a very old creature in Tolkien's mythology, isn't he? And he kind of predates all of this. But what he's doing, camping out in his little hut, singing songs for all eternity, I'm not quite sure. So, Bree is the prancing pony. Is it the village? Oh, it's a prancing pony. Oh, sorry, I'm getting my pubs wrong. That's inexcusable, isn't it? Seabit, hello, yes. So Tom Bombadil was literally spring. You never get in other books, just a background character in the world with literally no relevance to story. Yeah, any other author would have succumbed to an editor and cut that bit. Now, having worked with quite a few editors, they're generally there to help. They're not usually there to go, I'm going to sabotage your book, you nasty piece of work, author you. They're generally quite useful. I found working with editors actually quite fun, because I'm kind of like, you know, it really makes me think, do I need this scene? Or is this scene there just because I like writing this scene, and does it help with the story? And sometimes it doesn't. And I've had a few arguments with editors over things. I mean, one of the most valuable editor contributions to one of my stories, Bongo Baggins, you don't edit Tolkien. It's just you know, the bit that you know, I mean, personal example, Elite Reclamation, for example, the editor was generally okay with most of it until it got to the end, and he just said, this ending is rubbish. And I said, pardon, you can't say that. I said, yeah, well, I can, I'm your editor, that's what I'm paid to do. He says, you've got the main heroine, this Kahina lady, and you've got the main baddie, who's the Octavia, you know, this sort of nasty piece of work. And he said, you know, they are the main. You kind of, you know, I know they're not both nasty and evil in their own ways, but he said that, you know, you've got a protagonist and antagonist, and they sort of face off, but they face off in such a way that they never actually meet in person. You sure that's how you want it to end? And I was like, that's a good point. And the way I'd written the first draft of Elite Reclamation was that Octavia's spaceship was shot down without Kahina being present, so they never actually met in the flesh. And my editor said, that's just, you're going to leave your readers unsatisfied. These two need to meet, argue, and, you know, slap each other around a bit, all that sort of stuff. And I thought, in hindsight, I thought, actually, no, you're right. I need to get back and change that. So that to me was a good piece of editorial advice, which I did take on board and I accepted, and I rewrote the ending. I had to write a whole extra chapter as well, which was a real pain. But the book was slightly longer. So I do value editorial input. They do. If you get a good one who understands what you're trying to do, then they will make your story better. They will polish it up and make it sharper and twisty. And I've always appreciated that bit of fine tuning. Now, Tolkien, of course, is a bit of a classic. I mean, you couldn't edit it now; that would be outrageous. But could you have edited it better at the time? It depends who's doing the editing and whether Tolkien was a case of no, this is because some authors will basically say no, this is how it's got to be, and that's that, and they won't accept any negotiation on it. I don't know. I don't know enough about Tolkien to know what kind of guy he was in terms of his personality. So I think I don't know. I personally would have cut the whole Tom Bombadil bit out because I think it's really quite boring, and it doesn't help you understand. It doesn't. There's not a section in the story where somebody says. I mean, actually, Gandalf I think mentions it, doesn't he, in Rivendell, from what I recall. I think he says something about, oh yes, well he's always been around and he will always be around, but he won't hold the ring for us, that we can't count on him for help, or something like that. Or maybe that's Elrond, I can't remember. But so that there's a vague mention of it there. But in order to find out who Tom Bombadil actually is, you can't get the answer from Lord of the Rings, as I recall. You have to look him up somewhere else. So that's I would have cut him out personally. And I think they were wise to do so when they made the films. Don't mention the badge. Don't talk about the badge. We've done the badge. The distraction has been done. So Tom was there to rescue them from the Barrow-wights. Yes, that is very true. But again, what did they get from the Barrow-wights? They got some weapons, I think, didn't they? Or is that where one of them got the Elvish? Was it Merry or Pippin got the Elvish sword or something? I can't remember now. Commander Shortly likes it. Okay. I don't know that Tolkien ever properly explained Bombadil. Maybe the fans have worked that in afterwards. And Old Man Willow. So they kind of made a nod to that bit, didn't they? In the forest of where Treebeard is, with Pippin getting stuck in the crack and all that sort of stuff. And it was a bit. What an editor, I'm pretty sure, all the editors I work with now would take that first book and go, this is too long. You're taking too long to cut to the chase, Tolkien. You need to get on with the story. It's no, Sting came from the Hobbit, because he got that from the trolls, didn't he? So I thought Merry and Pippin maybe picked up some decent weapons from the Barrow-wights. I can't remember now. I'm going to read it again soon, so I'll tell you. I can't remember which way around it was. It's much the same as Peeves the Poltergeist being cut from Harry Potter films. Apparently Rick Mail was extremely pissed off that he decorated the country. Oh, that's a shame for him, isn't it? Yeah. Particularly if you've done a lot of hard work and then they've decided to edit it out. The problem with editors is that they do cut things. And I think editorial fashion changes. Now, I don't know if we've got any editors on the stream, but if the editors I've spoken to have definitely got a style at the moment, okay? They're absolutely. I mean, I've given this advice to people on this writing stream. Is that at the moment they're absolutely merciless on adverbs. Okay, absolutely merciless. You're not allowed any at all. I mean, it's like being put on a strict diet. Okay, sugar? No, you can't have any sugar at all. No chocolate. Editors are the same at the moment. There's no adverbs allowed. Okay, you're not allowed to put any words ending in ly. Editors just go. They hate them. That's just the thing. Okay, so editors don't like adverbs. All right, they sort of seek them out and destroy them. And the pacing of the book has to be quite fast. If you start going into lots and lots of flowery description of a thing or a person or an event or anything, editors just go. Okay, now I don't know. Whether or not that's a style thing, whether that's a modern thing, and how that's evolved over time. Actually, to be honest, an editor's take on this would be quite interesting. Has editorial is there a style that evolves over time? because certainly all the editors I've worked in the last 10 years have all been quite truly and Hatley and doggedly, badgely. Oh, you guys are evil. You're very evil. I like you. And I'd like to know if editorial styles have changed over there, because I'm sure they must have, because I mean, obviously novels do as well. And when you read some of these older novels, you're just, you know, by modern editorial standards, you're just shocked at how different they are, because Tolkien can get away with all sorts of stuff that I can't get away with now. You know, here's a long flowery description of something that's totally and utterly irrelevant to the plot. In fact, here's a series of characters, an entire chapter, which does nothing to move the story along at all. But that's okay, because I'm Tolkien. You can't do that nowadays. Not if you're going through an editorial process. I mean, if you self-publish your work and you don't use the services of an editor, you can obviously write what the heck you like, and if it works, then it works. You know, I'm not going to get sniffy about whether or not you actually need to use an editor. I personally have found it valuable, but you don't have to use one. There's no law that says you must have an editor before you publish a book. Otherwise, you're just, you know, you're just not. It's not acceptable. Yeah, it's wrong. I don't know. We have shorter attention spans. Shorter attention spans is definitely a thing. I think. We live in a society which is a lot more kind of pithy and to the point, which amazes me that anybody watches these streams, because of course I'm exactly not that. I can be distracted like that. We could have an entire chapter on tea in the middle of my next sci-fi epic. I think that would be quite important. And style has changed. Is it just shorter attention spans? I mean, I think that's an element, because long waffly diatribes like the one you're watching now are definitely out of fashion. Okay, so you guys are very, very, very cool, all right, because you're unfashionably enjoying something. Does that help? So yeah, I'm not sure if that's a thing. It could be, and certainly editors will always challenge you today on adverbs and pacing, and an emphasis on dialogue over description. So you can, as long as you filter your description in between the dialogue, you're kind of okay. But a big, long, massive paragraph of, well, the sun came up and the sky was red, and the mountains were glistening with dew, and the grass was waving in the breeze, all that sort of stuff. An editor's going to go, whoosh, whoosh, get to the point. What's happening? So there is a balance to be found there, and maybe the balance is a bit pushed one way or the other at the moment. I don't know. I'm if you've read any of my books, hopefully you have. I mean, I tend to spend most of my time on the characters and the dialogue anyway, because that's what I prefer to write. And Tolkien does to a degree. I mean, he's got a lot of dialogue. I mean, most of the scene that I'm in at the moment is Gandalf and Bilbo, chewing the fat over this ring. And it's mostly, to be honest, it's mostly Gandalf doing all the speaking, and Bilbo's going to go, but what about, that's the Bilbo, not Bilbo. Yeah, no, Frodo. Sorry, not Bilbo. His job is to keep prompting Gandalf to say something more. Two people in the scene. So, and the modern world is just shallow, not interested in history, either real or fiction. So yeah, I don't know. Is it a kids? Is it kids today? Some of it is. I'm a bit wary. That seems like quite an easy cop out to me. To explain this well. I think some of it's better. I mean, even as a younger person, I remember reading Lord of the Rings, thinking, what is this whole Tom Bombadil about? I remember thinking at the time this seemed like an awful lot of waffle and stuff, and it's like, where's it going? And I think it's not unreasonable when you're reading a story, if the writer goes to the time and trouble of introducing a character, giving them a bit of backstory, so you're kind of going, or a name, and giving them they're clearly doing something. I think you've got to write as the reader to go, okay, so the writer is basically telling me here's a character to watch out for, in some fashion. Maybe they're going to say something profound that becomes useful later on in the story. Maybe they're just a bit of a way marker telling the main characters where they need to go next. All those sort of storytelling things. But if the writer introduces a character, gives them a name, gives them some backstory, makes them do some interesting stuff, and then basically they wander off out of the story having not done anything, I think as a reader you're entitled to go, well, what was that about? So I don't think that's unreasonable somehow. Obvious foreshadowing is obvious. You've been watching the what are they called, those those pitch meetings. Those are brilliant. I'm loving those at the moment. They are so funny. Yeah, so the thing we should learn from history, not to make the same mistakes over and again. Just don't lose happen. Yeah, well, that's true. Dress Alex Salmon in a blue jacket and yellow release, and there's Tom. You're quite right, actually. Terra Firma, I think a sensible question here. Drew, is there anything to the idea of bringing the character with some detail, though that does not factor big in the story, that is not somewhat realistic? Well, it depends what you're trying to do, I suppose. Now, it depends on what your story is about and what the purpose of your story is. Now, if I look at my own sort of stuff, then my purpose, if you like, behind the stories is relatively straightforward. Okay, my stories are there to primarily to entertain. They're not supposed to be taken all that seriously. They're not, you know, and Tolkien wasn't a big fan of this. You know, they're not allegories. They're not trying to teach you a lesson. All right, they're not. Oh, this actually is a meta-transposition of the Second World War into a different context to basically allow you to evaluate your own criteria without the premonitions of previous experience. You know, all that sort of stuff. I don't do that. I don't like it. I avoid it. My stories are aimed to basically get you to be invested in the characters that I create. So, you know, I create people who hopefully have some realistic flaws that you kind of sort of admire, but sort of kind of think, not sure. And, you know, you enjoy spending time with the characters that I write. Therefore, and I mix that in with a plot that goes from over here to over there and then gets resolved along the way, hopefully with a few twists and turns along the way. There is always a direction to my stories. So they're not realistic in the sense that you know, real life doesn't necessarily have a direction. You know, it could be completely random who you bump into next week. Whereas my stories are directional. They're going somewhere, even if the characters themselves aren't aware. I am, and I know which direction I'm driving this story in. So that's how I tend to write. Now, that's what my stories are like. Now, if you were narrating real life, that wouldn't work, would it? Because I've got no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. And, you know, I might bump into my, you know, somebody I haven't met for a while. Well, not at the moment, because nobody gets to bump into anybody. But, you know, for example, at the moment, we've got a guy in who is doing some decorating for us. And, you know, we'll, you know, in the morning, I'll make him a cup of tea. We'll have a random conversation about something for maybe about 15, 20, you know, minutes tops. He'll get on with his work and I'll get on with mine. Now, we could narrate that, and that would be a perfectly sensible thing to narrate. And it might fit in a story. But the conversation I have with a painter decorator chap doesn't go anywhere. It's just incidental to the event. And it might be a comfortable thing to have in a story, but it doesn't help necessarily with just the direction of the story is going. Now, if your intent is just to capture a normal domestic situation, then maybe that's okay. If your intent is to drive the story forward to a conclusion whereby Drew achieves the thing that he's attempting to achieve, having the painter and decorator in the story may not be useful. So you've got to, as a writer, you've got to decide, what is your objective? What are you trying to do? And in a fantasy scenario, you know, when I look at Tolkien, what is Tolkien? Well, it's a story that primarily is about the destruction of the ring, and basically the travails of the people trying to achieve that. That's basically what it is, and they're learning more about the evil of this ring as they go along. I'm going to be interested to read you, but the Tom Bombadil bit to me kind of detracts from the story. It doesn't help it at all. It's just confusing. So I don't know, and feel free to disagree with me, but I would have chopped it out, and I think an editor today would probably do the same thing. So there we go. I think the character I invested most heavily in is good old Conan, best when the story is written by R.E. Howard. Okay, Andy, you're talking about Fantasy Tonight, finished Lords of Midnight the other day. Awesome. Oh, thank you very much, Rob. Hope you enjoyed that. Now, Lords of Midnight is an interesting one, because what's the point of that story? Well, the point of that story is, of course, it's based on a computer game, which itself... Now, and I hold dear Mike Singleton in the greatest respect for having created Lords of Midnight, but of course it was a rip-off of Lord of the Rings. If we're being kind. And when I wrote Lords of Midnight, I sat down with the guy who owns the IP, the chap who rewrote the computer games for modern PCs, Chris Wilde, and basically said, look, the biggest problem we've got here is Lords of Midnight is a rip-off of Lord of the Rings. We've got to try and avoid rewriting Lord of the Rings, but in a modern context. That was quite difficult, actually, because of course the source material forces you down a certain direction. So, you know, replace the ring with the ice crown, replace Frodo with Morkin, replace Aragorn with Luxor, replace Gandalf with Rothron. It's basically the same story. Yeah, there's an epic quest to go and destroy the ice crown. Okay, and we've got to defend the major citadel against the bad guy armies who are coming to defeat us. Okay, this is sounding quite familiar. And so it was a challenge to Lord of the Rings, Lord of Midnight. It really was quite hard. But it is, you're quite right, Chris. It's a classic tale, isn't it? It's a classic tale of, you know, good guys working against the odds to defeat the great evil. You know, it's what fantasy novels in the 1780s were all about. You know, the genre has kind of moved on a bit since then, because it all got a bit samey. And if you look at, if you look at the Sword of Shannara, you know, that series by, who's that by? Anyway, you know what I mean. You know. That's the same story, isn't it? You know, the plucky adventurers go off, learn something about themselves. There's an important talisman that they need to use to defeat the evil bad guy who will otherwise end the world in eternal darkness for reasons that are a little bit obscure. You know, eventually against all the odds, Terry Brooks, there we go, Kelly Bangles, eventually against all the odds they succeed. There's always a mysterious mentor type fellow who's kind of watching from afar but never quite gets involved in the way you think they could, because they've got some other problem that they're trying to deal with. It's classic fantasy stuff, isn't it? Which is, and that's why probably we rather like it, because it's in some ways like that. It's quite predictable. And you're quite right, Gianna. Terry Brooks did get exactly that criticism. It's just Tolkien, but again. But you know, the same thing has happened with sci-fi. Just quickly going back to sci-fi for a minute. You know, when Star Wars came out, I mean, Isaac Asimov said he actually quite enjoyed Star Wars. He said, yes, it was quite interesting. I quite enjoyed Star Wars. Once was enough, he said. He said, and when Battlestar Galactica came out, he said, no, I've had enough of this thing. You know, back to the proper sci-fi. So it's all too similar. So, whereas in my head, Battlestar Galactica and Star Wars are very, very separate, different things. But obviously, Asimov basically tarred them with the same brush. So yeah, Chris Alan on the Druid is very Gandalfy, isn't he? He's sort of dark and mysterious and powerful, and has been around for a long time. Alanon comes across as quite a bit more sinister than Gandalf. Gandalf is rather more fluffy and friendly. Most of the time than Alanon is, but you know, you've got that sort of, you know, wizardy kind of character in there. You know, the archetypes, I suppose they'd be called. You know, you've got the young, plucky adventurer, but who's rather naive, and then you tend to have the slightly more careworn older one who's a bit cynical, which is a bit of your Han Solo, Luke Skywalker vibe going on there. In which case, in Lord of the Rings, you kind of got Frodo and Aragorn and that kind of vibe going on, and I can't remember the characters in the Sword of Shannara, but and the problem with the Shannara series, of course, that you had the first one where they go and kill the evil creature in the north. I can't remember who it was now, and then in the second book, which I think is the Elf Stones of Shannara, they have to go to the elves, and then they have to defeat another evilness that is going to destroy the world, and then in the next book. They have to keep doing the same thing, and it's just the next generation gets handed down the same problem, and they always have to defeat the ultimate evil, which is otherwise going to take cast the world into everlasting darkness. Quite why the bad guys always want to cast the world into everlasting darkness, or in the case of Lords of Midnight, yeah, they want to keep it in everlasting winter. You know, that's just uncomfortable for everybody. Why would you want to do that? And you know, Sauron. from Lord of the Rings. As I understand it from the way Tolkien read it, Sauron is effectively seeking vengeance for having been dethroned by one of the, I'm not sure of the top god in the Lord of the Rings kind of hierarchy, but at least, but yeah, one of the other ones, one of his contemporaries perhaps, he wants vengeance against the elves for removing his fair form, because he can no longer materialise in fair form, but and everybody else has to suffer at the same time. That seems to be Sauron's motivation. He was just a sore loser, you know. So the bad guys are usually not all that well developed, really. Sauron's motivation for all this war and destruction seems to just be he's a bit miffed. And I have to say, we struggled with Lords of Midnight to go, okay, well, what? Yeah, we've got Doomdark, the Witch King. I wonder where Mike got the word Witch King from. And Doomdark was almost too comical to use. And it's like, okay, well, he's cast the world into everlasting winter. Okay, we haven't heard about that one before either. That's very Narnia-ish. But why? Why has he done that? What does he gain by casting the world into everlasting winter? And it was like, you have to have a think about these sort of things to try and write a story that sort of kind of makes sense. Because he can, says Nimdash. It's tricky. It's tricky. Sauron was the underling of the big bad guy in Silmarillion. Yes, so there was Melkor, wasn't there? Melkor was the top baddie in the Lord of the Rings. And his master got dethroned, and then Sauron tried to corrupt Numenor. He succeeded, but the Valar punished him, and the island sank. That's right. So I do remember all that from the Silmarillion. That's why Sauron was called Sauron. Sauron. I always thought it was Sauron before I watched the films, and then now I can't say it without getting Sauron. You know, and that's sort of. What is it with the pronunciation in those films? It's like, you can't say anything without kind of really emphasising the first syllable. It's Sauron. Or Mordor. It's like, you can't just say Mordor, you have to say Mordor. This sort of really guttural, almost sort of Scandinavian style of speech. Not quite. Maybe that's how it's supposed to be pronounced, but it seemed very effective to me. Melkor, who became Morgoth. That's right. Sauron in my head ever since. Yeah, so. Perhaps he's in the candle business. Yeah, so that is a problem with these top evil baddie dudes, isn't it? We've discussed evil baddie dudes before. Why should they want to make everything uncomfortable for everybody? I mean, if I was going to be an evil overlord, I think we've discussed this at some length in the past, but if I was going to be the ultimate evil in a fantasy realm, I wouldn't make it uncomfortable. I'd make it jolly pleasant. I mean, I might have servants and slaves, yeah, but my ultimate Tower of Doom wouldn't be a dark-hued thing with lots of, smell and filth about and lots of debris and everything on fire and always looking dark and gloomy. It would look like a 5-star hotel. It would be a jolly pleasant place to be. There'd be swimming pools, there'd be ski slopes, there'd be all sorts of cool stuff. I might be an evil despot, but I would be an evil despot and then people would go, yeah, I can see why he's an evil despot. He's got a jolly nice life up in that tower of his, while the rest of us are all starving to death down here. The immediate environs of my Tower of Doom would be laid to lawn with lots of flowers. It would be nice. Okay, everyone would be really, really envious of my tower. There'd be none of this blackness and smoke and volcanoes and all that sort of stuff. I mean, that's just dangerous, and that's just asking for trouble, isn't it? And I would, if my evil minions were required to go out and subdue people, I would want them to look half decent, and none of this sort of flesh hanging off your face and orc style stuff. So I don't know. I always struggle with the motivations of the bad guys. Evil but in comfort. Exactly, yeah. If you're going to be evil, do it with some style. None of this kind of like, I can't see the attraction of being a flaming eye on top of a tower. I mean, I just don't get that. That's not much of a life, is it? What are you? You're the ultimate power in the land, but what are you? You're an eye on top of a tower. I mean, how can that be, satisfactory? I don't get that at all. Unless he sort of became that and he was cursed into that, I suppose. You could have a tragic story that makes a bit more sense. We don't actually know what the inside of Barad-dûr is like. It may have been, it might have been, yeah. So yeah, those sort of things are a bit problematic. Sort of medieval Richard. Yeah, that's sort of the vibe I suppose I'm going for. Although the Eye of Sauron is a mention of the movies, as I recall. Well, I'm just trying to remember how Sauron is described. I mean, the Eye of Sauron is mentioned as a phrase. Whether or not it's described as an eye, I'm going to have to. I can't actually remember. That's why I'm kind of curious to go and read the books, because I haven't read the books for a long time, and I've sort of, my memory is now a bit, I suppose, poisoned by the films. So I need to go back and read the original source material. So. I think that is it. He was a disembodied spirit when he lost the ring that he had poured himself into. So yeah, he made a mistake. Okay, so I can kind of go with that. That's that in a fantasy story. The fact that you are seduced by your own creation, or you're corrupted by your own creation, is a line I can definitely accept. You know, the fact that if you go too far in one direction, then you actually become the embodiment of maybe something you didn't desire to be, and then there's no way out of that because you've corrupted your own soul or your own essence or whatever it happens to be. Yeah, and so Sauron had all sorts of things going on. He'd lost his body, but his spirit wasn't destroyed or something, and it floats around for a while, then it can incorporate it. I'm not quite sure how that works when you're a disembodied spirit, but such things are a staple of fantasy. So anyway, so bringing the discussion back round again, Tolkien puts a lot of emphasis on the world building. You know, probably more, I would say, in some cases than the actual story itself. Now, if I compare and contrast that with myself, I do quite a lot of world building. You know, I can spend a good few months prior to a book figuring out how I want things to work and what the nature of things are. And in fact, with Shadewood, I've got I think it's about 40k words. Now, a Shadewood novel is about 120k words. Okay, so with 4 of them in the entire series, that's about 480,000 words. So say nearly 500,000 words is the entire Shadewood series as a book. Okay. The Shadewood Bible, as it were, which is not a publishable thing, it's a mess, but is about 40k. So my ratio, if you like, of world building to actual novel writing is about sort of 1 to 10 or 10 to 1, depending on which way you want to measure it. So that's me. That's how I compare. Whereas I would say Tolkien is almost 1 to 1, or possibly even more the other way. He's probably written more stuff that will never ever be published, or at least was never intended to be published, than he actually wrote that was supposed to be published. Now, I don't know how that varies with the different authors. I get the impression that, you know, somebody like Terry Brooks or somebody just literally wrote the stories and then kind of made the rest of the details up as he went along. Because there's more stuff that comes out in later books. You think, really? That doesn't make a lot of sense. I doubt there are any writers anymore who ever do so much world building as background as Tolkien did. It's just not a thing. No, it's probably not. I mean, I find this a bit annoying. I don't think we do enough world building now, because I think everybody's under so much pressure to get stuff out in as a short-term frame, as shorter time frame as possible. I mean, I do a lot of, watch quite a lot more TV this year than I would normally do because of lockdown and all those kind of things. And the number of inconsistencies, you just think, you just didn't sit down and plan this out before you started, did you? You know, you've just gone straight into this, written it and gone, that's a great idea, let's expand on that. And then suddenly in season 2, you've just contradicted the thing that you did in season 1. It's kind of like, what? And I notice this stuff a lot. And I think it's down to time pressure. People are so desperate to crank stuff out that they don't take the time to go, actually, I want this to work end to end. And whether that's a generational thing, I don't know. I'm conscious that now that I'm a bit older than some people, I very much like to sit down and plot things out. So with Shadewood, I worked out the precise nature of the story from end to end. I knew who was going to die, I knew who was going to live, I knew when people were going to die, I knew what the major events were and what order they were happening in, and what the whole structure of the novel was, what the sun was doing, what the planet was doing, how to navigate, what the ships were doing, all the movements around the planet, the different characters, all that I worked out in advance. The specifics of what people said to each other and how the arguments transpired and exactly how that developed, no, that's the process of writing for me. So I don't work out any of the dialogue in advance. That would be crazy. Just the rough emotional arcs of the story. That's how I do it. But I've always been a bit in awe of people who can write complicated stuff without a plan, because I can't do it, because I just end up writing myself into a corner where my brain goes, you can't do that because of what you did in the last chapter. No matter how much you want to do that, you can't, because it's going to contradict something you've already written. So unless you go and rewrite that, you're stuck. So I find I have to have a plan, otherwise I can't write anything complicated. I can write a straightforward story where somebody trundles down the street and meets a few people, but I can't write a complicated plot without plotting it, if that makes sense. And I don't know, I mean, it's interesting to look at Tolkien's notes, because he says he wrote it completely not in chronological order. So a lot of the stuff that's in Tolkien is written, he didn't sit down and write it from beginning to end. That's not what he did. He wrote scenes and bits and then moved them around and all those kind of things, which I find quite interesting, because I can't write like that. I like to write from the beginning of the story all the way through to the end, because I've got a plot. Whereas I think other writers will go, yeah, I've just got this really great scene, I've got no idea where I'm going to put it, but I'm going to write it because it sounds great, and I'm going to write it, and they turn it into an amazing thing, and there it is, there's a scene, and they go, where the hell am I going to use this? Right? I'm going to use it over there. And I don't know, writing is not a scientific thing. It's very difficult. Sounds like last season of Game of Thrones. I haven't watched that yet. I need to find out, sit some time. I kind of got a bit lost with Game of Thrones. I got to about season 4 and then I think I lost momentum. I've forgotten what happened, so I can start again. And it's the you know, it's TV series like Lost. I mean, I loved Lost for the first 2 seasons, and then I realised at the end of season 2, I thought, they have no idea where they're going with this. They're just making this up as they go along, and I suddenly realised how disappointing it was, because it was really, you know, because my writer's brain is, you know, the way I think about things is that, oh, there must be a plot behind this, and there's so many little moving parts. This is really clever. And then I realised they were just winging it all the way through, and there was me trying to, you know, put bits of string together to try and figure out things, and I'd worked out some of it to my, you know, to my horror, where I thought it was going, and then I kept getting it wrong, and I was like, this is really good, these twists are so clever, this is not going where at all I'm expecting. Of course it didn't go anywhere at all. You loved Lost, and then you lost love. Exactly right, Glenn. Very, very good. You can tell you're a writer. So yeah, so there's no right and there's no wrong way to do this. Yeah, and you can come up with something quite remarkable using all sorts of different methods. There's no way to say that the way I write things is correct, because critiques of the plotting method would basically say you haven't got the ability to be inspired by something along the way, because you've already decided how the story goes. You know, what about all the magic that can come from just saying, oh, the story's just wandered off over here and become this thing that I didn't expect? You know, that won't happen to me, because that's not the way I write. I would counter that by saying, yes, but my stories make sense. I'll be very dismissive. So you know, so that was the thing. Gone with the Wind was apparently written in bits and pieces. A lot of things are, and a lot of things become classics. And just because I think something should be done a certain way, for some strange reason, not everybody agrees with me. I find that most harder to understand. But apparently, it's true. But there we go. You know, so sci-fi, yeah, sci-fi. Babylon 5 is a good case in point. Now, there is a rare example in TV where the entire thing was plotted out properly, and you can see it has that much more depth to it, in my humble opinion, than other things. You know, because and for those of us who like a plot that kind of is, I suppose, self-referential and has integrity, not in its writing, but in the way it's constructed. A lot of us appreciate a plot that actually kind of, yeah, okay, I can see how that character has developed over time, and why this is happening, why that's happening. You know, so that sort of stuff for some of us is very, very important, and I think, you know, working that sort of detail out can pay dividends if it's that kind of a story. Drew declares wars on panthers. Absolutely right, yes. Glenn goes for Glenn's sitting on the fence, quite rightly too. I think a plot outline that leaves room to get creative between plot points can give the best of both. Now, I have been known to, and I will subscribe to that, Glenn. You're quite right. I have been known to go and look at my plot and go, actually, this would be better if I did this, and I will change the plot because of the way the book has evolved. So I'm not. I'm not basically saying my plot is right, that's it, game over, and I must adhere to it. If I get to a point in the book and go, actually, it would be quite a bit more fun if this happened rather than that. That definitely happened in Shapewood a few times. So, my plot will potentially evolve, but it will come back probably to where it's supposed to end, if that makes sense. So all those sort of things are elements of the writing process, and fantasy, I suppose, is probably, I mean, this might be a bit unfair because I haven't read so much fantasy as I have science fiction, but fantasy typically to me feels more formulaic than science fiction. Science fiction tends to wrestle with, I think, slightly more esoteric concepts than fantasy does. Fantasy tends to be, from what I've read, and if you've got examples where this isn't the case, then I'd be more than happy to entertain them. But I tend to find fantasy as more of escapism, whereas science fiction is quite often is escapism, but it's often a bit more challenging. Is that quite the right word? I'm not quite sure that's the word I'm looking for, but mind expanding. It's kind of make you think in different ways. What would it be like to be a machine entity or something like that? That's not really what fantasy tries to do, in my experience anyway. Plotting is just pantsing between bullet points, says Gianna. Touche, very good. Watched all three of the latest Star Trek films this week with Chris Pine as James T. Kirk. Plot was thinner than Rabsy Nesbitt's string vest with more holes in it. Love them as there's nothing apart from SFX holding it. Well, you see, Star Trek has always suffered from that sort of, because it's episodic, all the TV plots had to be resolved within 45 minutes because that's just the nature of making an episode. So that's always a challenge for a writer. The films have a bit more leeway, but none of the new Star Trek films make sense in the slightest. I mean, they're just totally mad from a plot perspective. The first one where they Kirk is ejected from the ship in the middle of a combat, lands on the planet, and he just happens to be in walking distance of both Mr. Spock's previous self and a Federation establishment where there happens to be an engineer who happens to know how to do transport beaming. It's like, what? That's just silly. I'll forgive it because it's Star Trek, but it's pretty poor plotting, really. It's not good at all. So that's just a mess, really, and it's only sold because it's Star Trek. If it was anything else, it would be a B movie. Things do have to change. Glenn, so in Reclamation, when you said Kahina and the baddie had not met, so did the thing that happens to Kahina to bring her to the baddie's presence not happen? No, so that's very true. That whole piece, I kind of went back through Reclamation and enhanced it because I thought there has to be a motivation for the baddie to be bad, and the protagonist and the antagonist otherwise would not have met and confronted each other and had that sort of moment. So no, you're quite right, Glenn. So those, spoiler free version there, but you're quite right. Yeah, so all that aspect of the story had to be added in because it wasn't there originally. So there we go. A stupid question, Drew. How do you start with planning a story? I flirted with the idea of trying to write, but I don't know. Well, what I've always found for me, Rob, is I like to write a scene. So if I've got an idea, for a vague idea for a story, I've usually got a scene in mind that I'd like. That is the one bit that comes up. So, for example, I've got the first novel I ever wrote was a book called Torn, and that turned out to be a massive diatribe between Christians and atheists over the existence of God and things. It's quite a fun story in that sense. But there was one scene that kind of popped into my head, which was a scene between a young Christian woman and an atheist scientist. They just happened to end up sharing a car to drive home on a kind of dark and stormy night. during the card journey, they get to arguing about God and faith and belief and all these sort of things. And I just wrote that scene because I thought that would be a fun scene to write. I just wanted to have the argument in my head between these two characters. So I wrote that scene and I put it in a drawer and I left it. And then a few years later I picked it up and went, why would they be in the car? Why would these two people have met? What happens to them after they meet? Does this argument get resolved? Do they still hate each other? Do they end up resolving it? What happens? And then that became the book. So for me, sometimes just writing a scene from the story gets me started. It might only be a couple of pages. It's just a seed, and then the seed starts germinating in your head a bit. So I mean, Shadewood started from oddly enough, from a piece of elite fan fiction that I wrote. So you can still find it on the net if you look up. What's the name of it? Schism. So if you, it'll be on the internet somewhere. I don't know where it is now, but if you look up Dru-ids Schism, there's a short story I wrote. I think it's Schism. Maybe it's something else. I'll see if I can do it. But anyway, there's this story about this crashed elite spaceship. Basically, there's an elite spaceship that crashes on this backward planet, and it's found by this primitive culture, and they assume it's some sort of message from the gods, and one of the characters, a girl, gets into the ship, and everybody else is saying, "No, it's an instrument of the gods. It will destroy us and stuff." And she starts poking and prodding the buttons, and she activates the escape pod, and the escape pod takes her back to the space station where the elite ship came from, as an elite spaceship would do. But the story cuts off at the point where you see the escape pod shoot up into space and go to the space station, and it leaves the reader with, well, what happens next? And of course I never answered that question. But that little short scene of, okay, what happens when two primitive people encounter some crashed spaceship and press the escape pod button, that led to the entire Shadewood series. So that's how I do it. Okay, I just write a scene that I think, well, that'd be fun. Let's just write a couple of pages on that and see where it goes. So oh yeah, the dog is quite good. Yes, so JR99 is quite good. I will often go off for a walk with the dog, and there's something about, I mean, my wife and I tend to walk the dog very early in the morning, and at this time of year it's just literally is just dawn, so the sun is just coming up above the horizon, and the trees are there, and it's misty and it's nice, and it's quite an inspirational time of day. I find I like dawn. I find sunsets a bit depressing, whereas dawn I rather like. I don't know what it is, but that's just me. I find walking the dog at that particular time of morning, there's something about the air, there's something about the light, there's something, I just find my thoughts, I suppose, are a bit elevated, and I think, oh, what about this and what about that? And I just get my inspiration from doing those kind of things. So whether the dog is telepathically telling me what to write, I'm not sure, but sometimes I get my ideas from just walking around and looking at things. So there we are. So that works for me. And the other thing that does work for me as well is I watch movies, Star Trek, Star Wars, Battlestar, whatever it happens to be, and go, I could do that better. That's a stupid plot point there, but there's quite a good premise, so maybe I'll pitch something like that. So plagiarise as well. Think, I could do that better. So yes, you let us read that short story before you wrote the anthem. Yes, that's right. There was an example of editing and how to change things, wasn't it? Well, what did happen? Well, I don't know. I never finished that story. The poor girl basically gets in the escape pod, presses the button, the canopy comes down, locks her into place, and it takes off. And the guy who's left behind, basically, he's kind of a bit miffed because he was sort of vaguely romantically inclined towards this girl, and she's disappeared off into space. And he just goes back and reads some ancient literature of his people, which basically says, and lo, out of the sky came the future and she was blessed, or something like that. And he assumes it's a prophecy about what's just happened, and that's kind of where I left it. And it's up to you, the reader, to figure out what what happens next. So there we go. So I've heard some people say they start with plot ideas or a scene or just characters. And yeah, so sometimes the character, I mean, Shadewood did sort of start with the Kiri character. So what I thought to myself, what would be interesting, because I mean, one of the things I had observed with lots and lots of fantasy and lots of sci-fi is you started off with female characters who were very much, oh, rescue me from the horrible monster, you know, that sort of 60s, 70s stuff. And then all the female leads went butch and completely and utterly self-sufficient. So you're thinking, you know, Sigourney Weaver in Aliens, and you know, is it Vascar in Aliens as well? You know, those kind of characters where they're just as kick-ass as the blokes. In fact, probably more so. Yeah, they didn't need anybody to help them around, and that sense of you know, I suppose vulnerability to a degree was utterly lost for a while, and then it sort of came back. But most female characters that you see represented, at least a lot of female characters you see represented today, are just as tough as boots. I mean, they don't take any crap from anybody, which is I suppose quite refreshing. But to me, they're not very. They don't have that vulnerable side to them, which I think is still there. And so when I came up with the idea for Kira, I thought I want somebody who, to start with, you think is just another one of these really tough kind of female characters who just goes through kickboxing everybody into oblivion when she doesn't like them, and that's your first impression of her. And then as time goes on, you start to see actually she's really quite insecure and vulnerable and unsure and trying to figure out what the world is about and not really sure, and she starts making mistakes, and she becomes a bit more of a tragic figure rather than, you know, a kind of heroine, if you like, in the classic sense. And I wanted to make the characters a bit more rounded, so I had this idea. That was the first one, so I started with Kira. Then I came up with, okay, well, what's the flip side of this? And so I came up with the character Zoella, who is, she starts off being the kind of please rescue me kind of girl. And actually she becomes the toughest character of them all throughout the sort of series of the stories, and doesn't, you know, and she actually goes through a mental breakdown as in the story, where she actually has a sort of what we call today a mental health crisis, and has some serious, you know, problems that she has to kind of work through as a result of things that have happened to her in the world. And then to counterpoint that, I do, you know, the male characters are almost a supporting cast, and that's just the way I wrote that story, because I just wanted to do something that was not quite so formulaic as most of the stuff I was watching on TV at the time, and reading books. So I was just trying to make the characters different. That's what one of the emphases I wanted to make. But I also wanted to play, okay, let's, you know, I'd come off the back of writing the Elite stuff, which was good fun. But I was trying to. The problem I had with Elite was it was fantasy. I mean, you don't think of Elite as fantasy because it's got spaceships in it. Therefore, it's science fiction. You know, the genre guidelines are a bit vague anyway. But Elite is a fantasy. Okay, it's totally unbelievable in the sense of that could never happen. All right, you know, the technology is wrong. You know, the history is ridiculous, and all the other things. It's only believable if, you know, with a lot of suspension of disbelief. And the same with Star Wars. I mean, it doesn't make any actual sense that things ever happen this way. So I wanted to try my hand at writing a sci-fi novel that actually was set in the real universe, i.e., you don't break the physical laws of the universe. You have to work with them. Could you do that and still make a compelling story? That was my aim with Shadewood, to combine those sort of things. And whether or not I succeeded is entirely up to you. But that's what I was trying to do. Hope Hubris. I have thousands of ideas for plots might get around. Yeah, just. I mean, the thing is, just write them. You don't have any preconceived ideas that you have to publish them or make them brilliant. Just write them. Get into the habit of writing. This is one thing I always say to people. If you want to write, you have to practice. Okay. And if you want to write a book, you've got to build up to it. You can't just say, tomorrow I will be an excellent violinist. Okay, you just can't do it. You haven't got the physical stamina for it. Or, you know, tomorrow I will run a marathon. It's not something that any of us can do. You have to build up to it. And if you want to write a book, you can't just say, tomorrow I'm going to write a book. You can't do it. Your brain isn't capable of doing it. Your brain isn't ready for it. You have to expand your ability to write something coherent bit by bit. So start off with a scene, then maybe a chapter, maybe then a short story, then maybe a novella, then maybe work up to a book. Okay, and you will get there, but it will take a few years. Only if you're serious about wanting to write a book as the end goal will you actually get there. It needs, I'm afraid there's no shortcuts on that. You need grit and determination, and you've got to stick at it. And if you want to get good at writing, I hate the phrase "get good," but you know what I mean. generally get good at something, you have to practice. You have to put in some graft. You have to put in the hours. I write something for at least 2 to 3 hours a day because I'm a writer. That's what I do, okay? And the only way you stay good at doing something, it's like if you want to be a top violinist, you have to practice every day. And that's just the craft, okay? Yeah, if you want to be good at something, you have to practice at it, and you have to maintain that level of discipline and practice. You can't just say, nah, I'm good for a couple of months, I'm not going to write, because you'll just stop, okay? It's like running or weightlifting or anything like that. If you want to write, if you want to be a writer, you have to write. It's as simple as that. You have to sit there, and sometimes it's work. Okay, it's not just a case of yes, I'm awesome, I'm just going to be inspired. Off I go with my keyboard. Sometimes it's like, oh, I'm stuck. I don't was right. No, that paragraph's rubbish, and you can literally make no more progress than a. I mean, I have days. In particular with the latest one, Doomdocs, partly because of lockdown, I think. Doomdocs has been hard work to write because A, it's a follow-on book. B, it's quite tricky plot-wise. So I've had some days where I've gone, yay, 3,000 words, go me. I've had other days where I've done 15 words in a day. That's like 2 words an hour. That's really quite depressingly bad, and so that's just the path of the course. And you have to go and tell yourself mentally, that's okay, it'll come, but keep at it. You can't just stop and give up because you'll just never get any good. So you've got to keep going, and there's no shortcuts to it. There's a flow chart on the internet somewhere that says, do you want to be a writer? Yes. Do you like sitting in front of a computer and staring at a screen and typing things? No, you're not going to be a writer. It's just this as simple as that, I'm afraid. It's work. It is not a romantic, nice kind of, the birds are singing outside the study window, the sun comes up, there's a beautiful green view outside. Oh, I'm inspired to write. It's not like that. It's not like that at all. Writing is work. Okay, writing is work, and you have to be prepared for it. Some days you go, yes, this is brilliant, I'm inspired, and it's all coming together. Other days you just oh, it's awful. You just kind of like want to kick the computer and run away. And sometimes you have to, because it's the only way to get around the thing. But it is work. Okay, it is work. Be under no illusions that writing is not work. Okay, it's fun. But it's equally as frustrating as well at times. It's work. Okay, it's work. It's not something you do just because you fancy a day off. That's not writing. Get good, says Glenn. Yeah, it took me 10 years to be able to start writing a novel I've written down. Yeah, I didn't write anything before. You have to build up to it. One of the biggest problems I found early on was it was over too quick. I'd go right. There's the story. I've done the whole thing. It's like. It's only 1,000 words long. I was like, I'm making, I'm going too fast. I need to slow down. So writers write, says Glenn. Yeah, apparently they do. Yeah, I won't get there until at least I sort word out. Yeah, I mean, your choice of word process and all that sort of stuff. That's entirely up to you. There's I just use Word because it's all I've ever known. And I'm used to it. It's like a comfortable old pair of trainers to me. I know how it works. I organise things in my head and then just move the paragraphs around in the word process. Now, some people will swear by some of these funky new tools that allow you to divide chapters up and it keeps track of things, and there's an Excel spreadsheet that links lines. I can't be doing any of all that. I'm old school. I just like a document. And I put little notes to myself using the comments tool saying, this needs fixing, this isn't good enough. That's how I do it. But, whatever tool you wish to use to write, that's absolutely fine. I mean, you can use a typewriter as far as I'm concerned, or do it by hand. I've written stuff by hand in the olden days. That's just mechanics, okay, of writing. But the trick being that you must write something. And so, if I get up in the morning and go and I open Doomdocs Revenge, for example, right now, and go, I really can't think of what to write today. I will shut it down, but I'll go and write something else. So you may have been noticing I've been creating a fair number of Elite Dangerous Law sort of videos. Now they need writing, and they're about, I don't know, they're about 10 minutes long, so maybe they're about maybe 1,500 words or something like that. But that's writing. I'm still writing them. And so it doesn't have to be the thing, but it has to be a thing. You've got to keep yourself writing. That's really, really important. It's like that guy from First Man on the Moon who decided that since he was out of money, he was going to write that play he said he already had in his pocket. Yeah, that's it. So we have this, there's this romantic notion that, you know, when I have time, I'm going to sit down and write a book. Okay? Never happens. Never happens. All right? That's just a romantic notion of writing. That's just totally unrealistic. Because writing isn't something you just do when you're relaxed. All right? Writing is a job. Well, not a job, but it's work. Okay? So you've got to work at it. It's hard work. It's something that requires effort. It's not something that just happens. So I've probably said that enough times now. Had 6 months of writing, 1,500 to 2,000 words a day, many years, Max's hope hubris. Never struggled for inspiration. Shame it was all too Well, maybe it wasn't. How do you know? Did anybody else read it? See, that's the mark. It says you can write something which either you think is brilliant or you think is total rubbish. But that almost doesn't matter until somebody else reads it and goes, nope, that was rubbish, or actually, no, I really like that. You know, all those sort of things. Writing is wonderful until something better happens, like the sun comes out. Yeah, so my writing ebbs and flows. If something interesting happening next door, or the sun's come out, or I fancy walking the garden, or someone's got a cup of tea or chocolate, you know, boom, writing takes a back seat. Biscuits, yeah, a cup of tea. Do you writers have background music on? I have to have totals. Depends what I'm writing. I can't. I have some music which I find useful for scenes. But most of the time, no, I work in silence most of the time. I find that better. Although, if I am going to have music on, it will be low-key classical music, nothing energetic. So, you know, I have some very sort of sweepy, serene sort of symphony type stuff sometimes playing. That's quite useful. Nothing upbeat, and certainly nothing with any lyrics in it. For me, depends on other people will be different. Beware of turning your hobby into your job. Yeah, that's very, very important. You know, if you enjoy doing something for relaxation, don't turn it into a job. It's my advice. That's definitely not a good thing. Drew, have you ever written purposely short, super fast version of a longer plot you were thinking of just to try it? Does it help? I've never really tried that. No, because I can't do it. I can't do short stories. I'm just not able to summarise. All my stories require massive character development and long complicated plots, so I can't do short story form. It's just not something I'm very good at. I have written some short stories, as you know, one that we put in our 9 Streams of Consciousness, but that is a struggle for me to try and put enough character development to satisfy me and to put a plot in to a story that's not very long. I find that really, really hard work, and I don't really enjoy it. I like building long complicated stories, I suppose. Well done, Alan. I'm seriously envious. Yeah, so Alan's prodigious output there is quite impressive. I can't do. I can on occasions do 2,000 words a day for a sustained period, but that I find quite hard to maintain. Can a novel be too fast-paced, says Fogsight, consisting mostly of action and interaction? I think it can. I think there's a danger nowadays that there's just non-stop action. I mean, certainly films suffer from this. They cloak their lack of plot by making everything seem ridiculously complicated. You're sort of left head scratching. What the hell is going on in this movie? Books I find less of a problem. I mean, I can't put hand on heart come up with a book which I've read going, this is just way too fast. I think you certainly could write a book that was bad in that context, but I haven't got an example of one that comes to mind. But certainly a lot of films, it's like, why is this rushing onwards and onwards and onwards and onwards and onwards when we just want to stop and chew the fat with the characters for a bit? Sometimes you just have endless action sequences in some of these films. You just think, I just want the guys to stop and have a conversation and maybe just have a campfire, where they just, isn't the world a really bad place? Yeah, isn't it outrageous? What are we going to do about it? Well, I don't know. We should sit down there and have a really good think about it. Let's have a beer, rather than all that sort of stuff going on all the time. Films definitely suffer from that at the moment. There's way too much action. There's way too much CGI in them nowadays, usually at the cost of character development and plot, I find. Emily says, did David Braben ever editorize your books? He only corrected me. He only corrected me on minor points of scientific accuracy in the early days. After that, he didn't really mind. He had some very funny ideas actually on I mean, I submitted the initial draft of Elite Reclamation. I think it must have been in January. I can't remember exactly what it was now. Years and years ago. And I remember I got it back, and Michael Brooks had put some comments in about this and that. And his comments were, and he's a writer, so he'd written books. So Michael Brooks's suggestions were actually really, really valuable. The only comments David Braben had put in was about the spectral class emissions of the red dwarf planet I was in, saying that some sort of emission criteria wouldn't be acceptable and the orbit wasn't realistic. And I was like, okay. Yeah, but I was like, I wanted to put my hand up and go, yes, but Mr. Braben, you're talking about a universe where lasers only have a 3-kilometre range and we can see them in the dark. Why do I need to be accurate about the red dwarf stellar emission frequency and the orbital periods of this particular planet? So I did put the correction in, but I was chuckling about it for a long time afterwards, thinking, and we've got hyperspace. That breaks all the laws of physics. You can't. So there was a curious attention to detail on certain elements that I found a bit odd. And that was a recurring theme with David Braben actually. And odd enough, that's a theme in Elite, isn't it? There's absolutely slavish, in my professional opinion, overzealous attention to detail on certain elements of scientific reality, and then a complete disregard of science on the flip side in certain other categories. I mean, I was watching the just as a very quick aside, I was watching the Dr. K. Ross talking about the science and the maths behind the terrain creation. It was very, very interesting on one hand, and I thought, wow, this is really impressive. This is quite impressive stuff. And then the other side, I was thinking, yeah, but at the end of the day, all you end up with is a wobbly grey terrain with some colours in the sky. You know, it's way over the top for what you need. And probably 50% of the effort would generate 99% of the results. Maybe it wouldn't. I don't know. Maybe that's unfair. But that's the sort. There is that sort of, to me, in the frontier mentality. There's maybe the balance is perhaps a bit off. But yeah, again, my opinion on that matter. So when I have time, yes. So if you want to write, you need to write. That's definitely a lesson from today. When the dog demands a walk. Thank you for the follow there. I've probably missed a few follows along there. I don't think my follower like thingy that's supposed to be up the top of the screen here is working. I think I busted that too. I cannot have music with lyrics. I find some very low-key classical music is good stuff. And Alan's officially retired. You see that? He's a lucky man. I haven't got to that stage yet. Glenn, I would definitely agree with you. The super crazy action battle scene. I mean, I have to ask my kids, who's winning? I mean, what was the recent one? They made me watch one of the Transformer movies, and I quite liked the Transformers when I was a kid. They've just morphed into things, whereas the Transformer movies today, I can't actually see what's happening. I don't know if my brain can't process the CGI fast enough, but it's just a blur. It's just a blur of motion to me. I can't actually resolve the characters, so I don't know who's winning or what's happening. And that might be my age, but a lot of CGI now. There's so much happening so quickly. I can't actually appreciate it anymore. The pacing. I mean, even in if you compare the new Star Wars films to the old ones, they got, in terms of the pace of the CGI, the middle, the what is now the first trilogy, which I know are not highly recommended Star Wars films, but the CGI in those felt about the right pace. It felt fleshed out enough to feel realistic, but not so fast it was insanely over detailed. Whereas in the later films, and things like Transformers and the Avengers, and I enjoyed the Avengers actually quite a lot, even though the plots were very, very silly. But the CGI is just, as far as I'm concerned, is overwhelming. There's too much happening. Just can't make head nor tail of it. So you know, that I find very, very difficult. So when you write too much, the book tends to slow down. Conversely, we consider Phlebas as a good example. Yeah. So the thing with I've always found, actually, that's one of the hardest things I found with Elite Reclamation was when I got to space battle scenes, because I mean it was an elite book, so there was going to be space battle scenes. When I started writing a space battle scene, I thought this is utterly boring to write. I mean, and it's going to be utterly boring to read, because you know, you can only write the ship turned around and blasted its lasers and weaved and ducked. You can only say that so many times before it becomes utterly repetitive and dull and boring. So I found it really hard to write a space battle, because my book was a character focused. You had to really see it from the perspective of the people in the ship, which meant you couldn't see a lot of the action because you weren't from an omniscient viewpoint outside the ship. Now, I could have written it from an omniscient viewpoint outside the ship, but then that changes the focus and changes the pacing again. So you've got all those things playing off against each other, and that is difficult. So what I ended up doing with most of the action scenes in Reclamation and Premonition was actually to kind of experience it through the character's eyes. So Salome Kahina, particularly in the first book, hadn't really been in space before, so as far as she was concerned, it was just lots of spinning around and feeling sick a lot of the time, and that's how I wrote it. I did the physiological effects of space battle to try and make it a bit more realistic. So rather than, you know, concentrating on what guns were firing and what the shield levels were and how well the engines were responding, it was just a case of, I feel sick, stop spinning this ship around, what's that noise, why is the thing shaking around, all that sort of stuff was, to me, a better way of writing a space battle, you know, from the perspective of somebody who had not been in a space battle before. It was just noise and confusion, and that felt like a more natural way to write it. So that's what I did in Reclamation. I mean, again, you tell me if that worked or not, but sometimes writing those sort of things is actually quite hard work. Yeah, and that's one of the good things about fantasy over sci-fi. You don't have to justify things. Well, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. I mean, you can just it's magic. But the problem you have with fantasy is if you just it's magic all the time, then there aren't any rules, are there? The classic one with Harry Potter is your parents are dead, Harry. That's tragic. And, you know, the entire story is based on the fact that Harry can't go back and meet his parents because they're dead, and not even magic can bring back the dead. Except for the time turner, which we'll use to rescue that hippogriff. It's okay in that particular instance. And so dear J.K. Rowling broke her own rule there, so that Hermione and Harry Potter can go back and rescue the hippogriff from having its head chopped off. The obvious question is, okay, well, why can't you use the time turner to go back in time a bit further, stop Voldemort from killing Harry's parents, and then everything's okay, surely? The moral of that story is we never put time travel in a fantasy story, is my view on that one. Tuplex, right, who's winning and why? You know, it is called, I think you're probably right, Freaky Deaky Dude, it probably is old age. I do struggle with modern SFX. I mean, in Transformers, I cannot see what is happening. Literally cannot. It's just a blur of metal and noise, as far as I'm concerned. Commander O'Connor, getting older. Welcome to my world. Stalker 260. That's not just you. Same here. Probably 60% of the rest of the population. I just cannot see what's going on. I don't know whether my brain is trying to process something that is. Whether I'm actually trying to watch it critically, or whether I'm just supposed to enjoy the fact that there's lots of colours splashing across the screen. I recommend trashing off the Michael Bay movies and go and watch the Two War for Cybertron miniseries on Netflix. I have got Netflix, so I will have to go investigate that. I'm so tired of the epic superhero Marvel movies, but actually liking some of the early Iron Man. And see, I quite enjoyed the Avengers, but enough is. I agree with you. Enough is enough. I don't want to watch them again. And I don't want to watch any more of that sort of movie. You know, the superhero thing is, you know, is okay for a while. So, you know, but you know, I've had enough of that now. I want something else. I want, more normal people doing slightly extraordinary things is to me more interesting. I didn't, and I made a big decision on Shade, but other than the background powers that I put into the world for the sake of storytelling. Those people are just humans. They haven't got super abilities. They can't fly. They haven't got force fields. They can't glow in the dark or use, magic themselves across distances. They've just got normal limitations, and I find that a little bit. You can then concentrate on what makes them special as people. Otherwise, they tend to become defined by their magic powers. So in the Avengers, the characters are very paper thin because they're defined by the powers they have, not by their personality. So each character has an ability that defines them, and that's what they do, which is okay in the Avengers because that's what it's about. But they're not very good characters in the sense that they're not. If you take away their powers, who are they? What do they do? They don't do anything. They're just they're kind of unrecognisable people. So those sort of slightly more cerebral plots. The problem is that those sort of cerebral plots don't often fit within the sci-fi and fantasy genre, and that's a bit sad because sci-fi and fantasy tend to be, at least in TV and film, a lot of the time at the moment, they tend not to be quite so thought-provoking. The reimagined Battlestar Galactica did quite well at that, actually, and some of the shows are less popcorny than others. The Martian was a great one. The Andy Weir one. That's a brilliant book, and B, a brilliant film, because it sticks to the science, and it makes a fantastic drama out of a totally and utterly plausible situation. Yes, there's a few bits in it which you think that's not realistic, but most of the time, The Martian is a brilliant piece of drama. It just happens to be set on Mars, but it's really, really good, and it's totally and utterly plausible. Whereas Star Trek isn't remotely plausible. Whereas The Martian is extremely watchable, and an awful lot of non-science fiction people will appreciate The Martian because it's a good drama. Okay, it's tightly written. It's very plausible, yet the character lurches from crisis to crisis to crisis, but he solves it not by appealing to some higher power or some superpower rescue him. He, I think, as he says somewhere in the movie, he just sciences the shit out of things, which is just brilliant. Okay, and that's got to be one of my favourite movies of the last 10 years. That is an excellent sci-fi movie, and if I was going to recommend somebody who didn't like sci-fi and say what movie would you recommend to me, The Martian would be really near the top of my list, because it's not outrageously difficult to comprehend. You can appreciate, okay, here's a guy living in a desolate environment, thinks his crew have abandoned him, and has to survive. It's Robinson Crusoe in space, really, but and that's a time-honoured, again, kind of classic film. So that's good. That's good. The Expanse is good as well. I thought the first 3 seasons were. Season 4, I personally fell flat on its face. But seasons 1, 2, and 3. Well, season 1 was a bit slow, but it got going. Seasons 2 and 3 were brilliant, edge of the seat stuff, very well written, and the character development was quite good in those. The characters came on and they learnt stuff about themselves, and they learnt stuff about their environment, and they challenged their initial preconceptions, which I thought was good. So The Expanse, again, quite well written. I'm trying to think, because we started off on fantasy, should we go back there? I'm trying to think of a good fantasy TV series where I thought, the character development here is good, and I'm struggling a little bit. I haven't. There are a few shows. I can't think of. Harry Potter is an obvious one, and Harry Potter is deeply flawed in some places, but it did give you characters you could relate to, at least if you were, a presumably a younger person, you could sort of relate to them. Harry Potter is something I would have enjoyed immensely had I been the right age to enjoy it. If I was a early teen when the first books came out, I would have absolutely adored Harry Potter. So I can understand why it's got an absolutely, pride of place in the hearts of very, very many people. It's not perfect. It's not brilliantly written in places, but it is very compelling. I enjoy, when I read it, I put myself into the kind of mode of a a teenage reader, I suppose, when I read it, and I loved it. I thought it was great. The first 3 books in particular I thought were brilliant. Then J.K. Rowling got sucked into they must make it into an epic, and the books got longer and longer and longer, and then I lost interest. So I did manage to finish it, but I only really consider the first 3 books to be good because they're short and punchy and they're children's books. I thought she was a bit ill-advised to not continue in that sort of vein, but each writer will do what they think they need to do. So the first 3 I thought were good, but after that I began to lose interest, which is a shame. And they ruined Indiana Jones with CGI. Yeah, they did. So you see, the first 3 films were great. The third one in particular, the third Indiana Jones film, was absolutely fantastic with Sean Connery in it. So that was, but the fourth one was a diabolical mess. So we don't talk about the fourth Indiana Jones film. It doesn't exist. There's only 3. I'm about 2 seasons into The Expanse. It's just on the verge of CGI over there, but it's still good. It is, yeah. So yeah, you got. I mean, the thing I liked about The Expanse is they again stuck to realistic physics, which is hard to do, but it shows it can be done. Yeah. So 1917, I did enjoy that film, but some of it I didn't seem quite right, but I quite enjoyed it. Imonex, did you pilot the ship that was Salome's ship was shot down by one of the players? Yes, I did. I was flying Salome as a ship at that point, and she died. I'm sorry, that story is concluded. I remember, Drew, when we were critiquing the first story I submitted for the anthology, I did that outside view of the ship, and you told me to move the POV of it. It was good advice. Yeah, so POV. I mean, we've talked about that in the past. Yeah, point of view is a very important thing when you're telling a story. And it's tied in with pacing. Is what can if you're writing a story, you have to do it from the perspective of somebody, and you're best off not swapping that the point of view very often. So if you're inside the spaceship, and that's where your character is experiencing whatever the event is, you can't suddenly write about stuff that's happening in the cargo hold that the character can't see. You've got to stick with what they can see. They might hear a rumble from behind them and wonder what it was, but that's all they can experience from their perspective. So you've got to be very careful with point of view. That's a classic mistake that writers tend to make early on, is that they go, right, I need to cut to the cargo bay, and if they don't tell the reader that they're cutting to the cargo bay, the reader's left with a, what's happening? Where are we? Who am I? All that sort of stuff. Yeah. So Chris says, yeah, sometimes the chase is part of the fun. Yeah, no, the chase is good as well. And chasing and the chase process is huge fun. What I did find about space battles, though, is that actually the tension and anticipation of the coming battle was far more exciting for the reader to experience than the actual battle itself. So if you can hype up the ship, tactically and strategically trying to position itself and all those things, I found that was actually much more interesting. I like the use of time reversal and galaxy coast. Yeah, that was quite good. 15-second time jump to the past. Watching critically is so true. My partner refuses to watch a film with me as I just pick holes in it. Yeah, no, that is a problem, that because you're so, as a writer, if you get too used to critiquing your own work, you critique everything else. I mean, I struggle to watch films now that I loved when I was younger, because I just, why are they doing that? That doesn't make any sense at all. So yeah, those sort of things, that is a problem. You can be overly critical. It is a problem. And particularly for those of us who are, have got additional attention to detail, shall we say, it can be an issue. The Martian film was very good, but it has some weak points. Yes, I mean, it has to be contrived as a film. Fingers near, says Glenn. I'm on season 2. Yeah, no, keep watching. Season 2 is season 2 and 3 are great. Has fantasy not had its day now? Yeah, so I suppose Game of Thrones. We need to talk briefly about Game of Thrones, don't we? It's almost 10 o'clock, so I've kind of gone over time. But Game of Thrones, and George R.R. Martin trashing trashing characters here and there. You know, so Game of Thrones is full of dragons. It's full of you know, evil baddie dudes, and people were very, very you know, lack of common standards of decency, I suppose, is probably the best way to describe it. An awful lot of gratuitous sex and violence, so particularly in the early seasons. Too much, I felt. It felt gratuitous as far as I'm concerned, and totally unnecessary to the plot. Didn't seem to push things on at all. So that got a bit tedious as far as I'm concerned. It wasn't so much a fantasy film early on as it was a sort of soft porn movie, really, which I didn't like, because that's not what I think fantasy is about. Well, it's not that kind of fantasy anyway. And you know, it took an awfully long time for anything to happen. I mean, each individual episode was interesting and fun to watch, but you know, the whole business about the ice dudes coming down from the wall and the dragon lady coming over from the east, and it's like, how long are these people going to be wandering about before they actually get down to the actual matter of invading something and sorting something out? It was, how many seasons was it? 7 or something? It could have been done in 3 with some decent writing. I felt it was stretched out and padded outrageously, in my humble opinion. I would have done it a lot snappier than that. There's just so much stuff that you just didn't need. There's too many characters. And it just got overwhelming. Very, unless you had a Wikipedia page. Who's this guy again? What did he do last week? Where did we last see him? You know, you had to kind of have an encyclopedia handy to keep track of the show, and that to me is just a sign of too many characters. You just don't need that many characters. It's just overwhelming. So you know, so that to me was a problem. It was too much. There's probably at least 3 seasons worth of stuff in there. So you know, so all those sort of things. I think there's a balance to be managed with those kind of things. I felt the TV series is way too padded out. People love the Harry Potters. Some people don't. You see, I quite enjoyed the books. Actually, I didn't. I mean, they're quite British, I suppose. But yeah. Sometimes, yeah. And being a writer does make movies quite hard. I have. Drew declares war on George R.R. Martin. Well, he killed off a lot of my favourite characters, so why can't I have a go at him? I didn't like that gratuitous. Right, I'm just going to. And you know, there is a certain level of artistic license in this, and I've I have done this to a degree in my own novels. So I've got to be a bit careful of throwing bricks in greenhouses. For example, in Shadewood, in book 1, Kiri gets a crossbow bolt straight through her hand, which of course is a ghastly thing to happen to anybody. It must be utterly agonising. So I put that sort of, and it wasn't a torture scene, but it was a war scene, and this young girl who's probably 23 or something at the time is crippled by the fact that she has a crossbow bolt go straight through the palm of her hand, and she has to free it in a horrible way in order to save her life. And so that's not nice. Okay, that's me being mean and cruel and inflicting pain and suffering on my characters, which is what writers do gleefully. And so I've got to be a bit careful, because I'm not entirely guilty of inflicting nasty pain, and some of my characters die, as you know. But I found with Game of Thrones, it just became, again, too gratuitous. How can we kill this character off in a really nasty, gruesome way? Just for the shock value. That's the impression I was getting. They didn't, it wasn't a case, well, let's just kill him and stab him to death. No, we actually have to, give him a few minutes of utter, I don't know, agony before he dies. That was over the top again for me. I mean, I know the medieval world is brutal and there was torture and all that sort of really bad stuff, but Game of Thrones I found was excessive, personally, in many cases. That put me off from watching it. It's too much for me, and I don't know if the books reflect that, but it was too much. So again, personal preference. I found the soft porn too much, and I found the gratuitous violence too much in Game of Thrones. It was over the top. Glenn's never read Harry Potter or seen the movies, but he did do the Harry Potter ride. I haven't done the Harry Potter ride, so there we go. You're not mean until you drop somebody's head off. Well, I say I have killed a few people in my books, but they, and death is a natural thing that can happen, and particularly in conflict. So there we go. There's this, and there's killing people in imaginative ways, and that's sort of where fantasies become quite gritty, hasn't it? I mean, you can't imagine things like that. I mean, there were a few nasty deaths in the films of Lord of the Rings, but it's usually just heads being chopped off, and a bit of blood splurting, and then falling. The torso is left falling on the floor, and you're back to shooting arrows and stuff. And a few people get stabbed, and and there's battle armies fighting each other, and people getting stabbed and dying, but not the sort of gruesome deaths, I suppose, that Game of Thrones popularised. And I don't know. I found that a bit distasteful. It was unnecessary as far as I was concerned. The storytelling. So. Oh yeah, sorry. Lord of Dawn, Drew, don't go playing in. Yes, I suppose. But I mean, yes, okay. So hands up, guilty. I have killed some people in a gruesome way. Yes, that's very true. And there's a few deaths in shame, but I haven't forgiven you for, Drew. Oh dear. Yeah, Glenn, there were a few character deaths in Shaver that really did hurt. Well, you see, the point is, I suppose, not so much it was to try and make the deaths gruesome, although I suppose I have done that as well. And sometimes it's, it's artistically justified, old chap. But the idea behind, particularly in Shaver, I don't think I did too gruesomely in Shaver. The idea there being that the deaths that occur in the novel are there to emphasise something about the character. So that, I mean, small spoilers, but Kiri does kill somebody in, I think, it must be book 3, and it's designed to be designed to be shocking, not so much in the way in such that the death that she, the murder that she does effectively is brutal and nasty and bloody. It's just she does it in a really, really quick way, and then just nonchalantly sits down and has a dessert afterwards. So there's this guy basically and I rather like this scene. It's one of my favourite scenes that I wrote. Kiri basically, this big chap challenges her to a duel, and he basically said, "I do my killing before breakfast," kind of attitude, and she says, "No, let's do it now." So she gets up, and she's only wearing like a frock, and this guy's sort of in his battle armour. And he said, "What do you mean now?" He said, "Now, I want I want to sit down and have my meal, thank you, let's get this over with." And so she gets up, they have a fight, and she just brutally kills him really, really quickly without any, there's no messing around. She doesn't toy with him, she doesn't give him a chance, she just disposes of him because she can. And so the fight is like seconds long, and then he's dead. And she gets up with a total, lack of regard for the fact that she just killed this chap, and sits back down at the table and eats her dessert. And then, but the point of that scene was to emphasise how cold and callous she could be at times, that she had a complete disregard for, life in certain circumstances. That was the emphasis of the scene. She didn't make a gruesome mess of the guy because he was an inconvenience for her getting on with eating her dessert. So that told you something. The idea there was that told you something about her character at that point in the story. That she was cold, calculating, and brutal, and that was it. This guy was in her way and being irritating, so she got rid of him, and that was as simple as that. She didn't want to waste any more time with toying with him. So the emphasis wasn't on how good the dessert was. No, she did enjoy the dessert. The fun thing about writing it was, of course, she sits down and starts eating this dessert, and of course the rest of the people around her were kind of in utter shock because she's still got blood-stained hands and a knife that's dripping with blood, which she sort of just stabbed into the table, and then she's spooning this dessert into her mouth with blood-stained hand, which is quite a good scene. And it's again just to emphasise her character. Strangely, the Hound was one of the meanest characters. Yeah, so the Hound I quite liked because he was brutal and nasty, but in a predictable sort of way. And my favourite character was I can't remember her name now, the girl who goes around with him with a little sword. What was her name? I can't remember now. And somebody will know. Anyway, that girl who's Anya, yeah, Anya Stark. That's it. She's my favourite character out of the whole lot, because she's taught how to fight, and she learns how to fight, and she grows and she gets better at fighting in a brutal world, and that's where she comes from. So she's definitely my favourite character out of that whole thing. Enya, I think Enya was a slightly different emphasis to Arya. Maisie Williams, that's right. Yes, so excellent character. So I haven't seen the end of Game of Thrones, so I'm going to have to watch that at some point. But yeah, so I think the fantasy genre has been a little bit overloaded by Game of Thrones. I think we need to take a bit of a breather. Science fiction has been quite well served, I think, by things like The Expanse, and previously to that, Battlestar Galactica and Babylon 5 and all those kind of things. You know, science fiction has had a bit of a renaissance in the sense it's quite cerebral. You have to think about it, with decently complicated plots. So fantasy almost needs something similar. We need less of the shock and awe and soft porn. We need more measured plots, compelling drama, but less of the visuals, I think. So I don't know. Maybe that's a suggestion. I need to have a think about it. I would like to write a good old-fashioned fantasy novel. I might try my hand at that at some point in the future. Lords of Midnight and Doom Nocturne Ruins don't really count because they're based on somebody else's work, and they're relatively contrived because they come from a computer game. So as you know, I'm planning to do another Shadewood Universe set of books at some point fairly soon. That's my next sort of thing, and that will be science fiction. And what I'd like to do there is something that's kind of elite-y in the sense of spaceships and flying around and stuff, but without all the fantasy stuff that Elite kind of colours the universe with. I'd like to do something a bit more sensible, but I'd like to do a fantasy series in a world of my creating, but where the magic has rules that can't be broken, and we don't need sort of lots and lots of violence and sex to sell the story, if that makes sense. But that may be a little bit of time coming where I have to think of some ideas, but so there we go. So anyway, we can continue talking about fantasy. I think we've got a lot more to talk about in fantasy. I'll have some more thoughts about it in the upcoming week. But anyway, it's gone past 10 o'clock. This has been a long stream, but never mind. It's been good. Sci-fi series first, Drew, you promised. Yes, I will honour my promise. We need to go on from there. But anyway, it has been lovely chatting to you all tonight. I hope you found that vaguely interesting. Thank you very much for turning up. I do appreciate all the viewers and listening to me waffling on a Monday evening about all things sci-fi and fantasy. And hopefully you picked up the odd tip as well. So there we go. So that's fantastic. You're not alone in writing from a computer game. Raymond D. Feist wrote a short story series based on the game, which is based on his original Magician series. Good, excellent. I didn't know that. So much. That's the problem. There's always something new to read and something new to learn about. So anyway, I hope you found that interesting. We'll continue with a bit of fantasy theme, I think, going on. There's lots more to talk about in the fantasy realm, and I'll hopefully have some more Tolkien insights as I continue with Lord of the Rings. So I'll keep you posted on that. But the best advice, yes, if you want to be a writer, write. Okay, it's really important. You can't just wake up tomorrow morning and go, I will be a writer, because you've got to work up to it. It's like building any other kind of muscle or any other kind of skill. You've got to start and get better and practice and practice and practice. So take that away. All right. You have a fantastic week, my friends. I will see you on Thursday for more Elite Dangerousing, more retro streaming on Saturday, and you never know, the occasional weird car video thrown in because my son's doing something wacky with his golf. To wait and see. But you have yourselves a fantastic week. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we will see you soon. Be good. All right, you guys take absolute care of yourself and have a fantastic week. See you soon, my friends. Bye bye now.